How do you run a company? People frustrate organizations, and organizations frustrate people.
Yes, I did a sales pitch with my team, and we had 10 people, India Igigu on the other side, and none of them had their camera on. That means you spoke into a black hole for about 1.5 to 2 hours.
What I notice in many companies is that there is this kind of monkey management, oh, can't make the decision. So, dear boss, why don't you meet her sometime?
Yes, hello, dear Andre. It's nice that we meet here again on the topic of Digital Adventures Decoded. We have committed to repeatedly exploring the 3 topics of leadership, sales, and AI. You are truly an absolute expert and also a coach on the topic of leadership. And you've also written a book about it. And your main topic is human-centered leadership. Tell us something about it. What does it even mean? I can't quite grasp it, human-centered leadership. Is it just another buzzword? Or does it actually have some substance?
Well, Mario, I can reassure you, first of all, it's not a buzzword, but let me start by saying that I'm really glad we're recording another podcast episode. And especially that we're recording an episode on a topic that truly concerns me personally regarding leadership, culture, and human-centered leadership. And maybe I'll start by telling you how the idea for the book came about. I've had years of leadership experience, worked a lot with technology, and have been able to accompany and shape many transformations. And what I've always noticed is that such a transformation is often viewed as a project in companies. Yes, it's a change project. It goes from A to B, and we know exactly, of course, where we start, but we also know where we end.
And my simple thought would be, dear Andre,
if it were that simple, and my realization is it's not like that, Mario. Yes, exactly. Because especially when you talk about change in companies, you first have to accept that it is continuous, right? It actually never stops because various influences from inside and outside continuously impact you. These are markets, these are customers, these are partners, this is technology. But there are also people with their needs. I'll get to that in a moment, Baskits. So we can't exactly plan how we get from A to B. And due to the fast-paced nature we are currently in, keyword AI, meaning artificial intelligence, which has developed at a rapid speed over the last few years and has been pushed into companies, it naturally leads to the fact that this goal, meaning from A to B, shift. And that is completely natural. This resilience, meaning first to accept that this is the case, and then as a company to develop the resilience, not only to be able to react to it, but to be able to handle it. So from my perspective, this is a major leadership task.
Yes. May I interject briefly, Andre? Sure. I am personally affected, if you will. Yes. As you know, we practically transferred the company, where I was also in management and a major shareholder, into another structure with an investor. And that was almost 3.5 years ago now. And we had exactly these post-merger issues. And of course, leadership was a very big topic, Quais, as well as Oki transformation, including digital transformation up to this day. I wouldn't say that it's ever completed, but what I've noticed, and I'd be interested in your opinion on this, ma'am, because you also say in your book that culture starts at the top. Yes. What I would have expected, for example, Andre, is that we did a merger. We were primarily in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, which already have different cultures, since you mentioned the topic of culture. On the other hand, we merged with a company that is headquartered in Bulgaria. And I personally would have thought, Bulgaria and Germans and Swiss, wow, that's going to be difficult in terms of cultures. But it wasn't like that at all. What was much, much more surprising for me personally, and I believe for many colleagues as well, was the topic of how to lead a company, yes? And that's why I found it so remarkable in your book, Culture Begins at the Top. For example, we chose a path where we said we do empowerment. People should also make a lot of decisions themselves. And on the other hand, we then encountered a company that was very much directed and practically led from the top down. And now I would be interested in your opinion on that. How do you deal with such a topic?
Yes, but you know what you're describing, Mario, it reminds me of many of family-run businesses where there are still patriarchs or matriarchs who lead the company. and where no decision bypasses them. And with that, I don't mean to say, Mario, don't misunderstand me, that it's bad, that it's fundamentally bad. But especially when we look at the German mid-sized companies today, it was indeed very, very right and important that some companies were led in exactly this way. Yes. And I would guess, even though I don't know the specific situation, that it might have been extremely functional in the case you just described, that this company was managed in this way for various reasons. I believe that this is fundamentally not an issue at all, but it most likely becomes one, as you describe, when you bring a different culture together with this culture. So if you have a hierarchically managed company, and how should I put it, a company with a culture where everyone is allowed to express their opinion and there is a certain degree of decision-making freedom and so on, and if you then fail to bring these cultures together, it becomes difficult from my point of view.
Exactly.
So, and you have, please?
No, and that was, for example, an absolute culture clash for us. And I found that so exciting because I would have expected that it would be more about personal relationships, as it often is in digital transformations, right? So one person doesn't like the other, but honestly, it wasn't like that at all. The people themselves got along extremely well, yes, up to this day. But what you then noticed is how do you work together? And what is the understanding, right? Let me give you an example. We then made official communications where on one side, I'm not even saying which one, there was one side. So I had, or up to this day, I have employees from both worlds, yes. I quickly brought both together in my sales department or in my organization. We then sent the same communication to all employees. And then you heard from one party, the former party, this is totally terrible and this is not acceptable and so on. The other party said, yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly how it should be done. And I found it really fascinating to repeatedly get feedback from employees on how the same communication is perceived so differently, also culturally.
That's absolutely right, Mario. And there's something I'd really like to mention. I mean, culture doesn't just have geographical causes, but culture is also about how a company is managed, and what role I have as an employee in a company. So what you're describing, if I'm in a company where I'm used to open communication, where I can also express my opinion, where even critical things are openly communicated, for example. And on the other hand, if I'm in a company where I'm exaggerating now and dramatizing it, where I receive very, very little information and actually only get positive information, and then suddenly receive communication where problems might also be addressed, then that is, of course, against the cultural values of the company as I'm used to as a person, right? But as a person, as a part of the system in this organization, I am conditioned by my superiors, by the interaction with employees from in many years of living in this company. And that's why it naturally feels unfamiliar at first.
And how do you see the topic of technological change? You've also described that in your book, right? So challenges and opportunities is the overarching theme, but especially now with AI, right? We are noticing this repeatedly now. There are people who are completely open to AI. Of course, there are also many fears, right? We will also address this in a separate podcast of ours. So we will also specifically address the topic of AI, or certainly in several episodes. But you can always notice, even in my organizational structure, that people are very, very open and say, wow, great, this helps me, and it does, or helps me to complete the repetitive tasks, and I can focus on other things. And on the other hand, you notice that there is fear or slash respect, which you can't always see at first glance, and that really this change, which actually needs to happen. Everyone knows that AI is not going away, but it is not being embraced. How? What would you advise me? Or how would you, or what advice would you give me? How can I deal with it? How can I improve the penetration of it?
Mario is ultimately a force that is either driven externally by competitive pressure, because competitors can either produce more cost effectively, are faster, have more innovative products, or whatever, or internally by, let's say, the IT department simply introducing a new product, a new process automating things, etc. So it is initially an impulse that comes either from within or from outside. And I believe that every company, and especially the leaders within the company, have the task, as we have done and as I have experienced and also done myself in the past, to roll out a new product, a new software, new technology, just because it's cool, right? We are all technology nerds and know that it's actually really cool, yes, to just roll it out and believe that, well, the people, the employees, they will handle it. Fortunately, that's not the case, or not entirely the case. That means this technology, no matter what it is, and AI, in the sense you mentioned, Mario, the fears, the concerns about job loss, lack of knowledge, security, and so on, to first address these things and take people along on this journey when introducing a new technology. I think on one hand, you also have to understand, and I mentioned at the beginning that we humans have needs that don't necessarily align with what an organization aims for, Mario. I recently said in a workshop that people frustrate organizations and organizations frustrate people. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, absolutely. I think as part of the organization, I probably frustrate some employee every day, unfortunately, unintentionally. That's clear. And on the other hand, I'm certainly also unintentionally frustrated by one or the other. So that's definitely the case. But the question is always, how can you channel this frustration on one hand? And also, I believe it's very important for the company culture to be open so that you can address the frustration. I think there's nothing worse than being in an organization where frustration is swept under the rug and everyone is somehow frustrated, but no one is allowed to address it because that's frowned upon. And at the end of the day, what is ultimately the consequence? We all rely on their people, and you need people. So without my team, I am nothing. And that naturally means, conversely, that my team is very dear to me and that I also want them to be well. On the other hand, I also have to ensure that the company is doing well. And that always brings us back to your statement that people frustrate the organization and the organization frustrates the people. I believe that cannot be prevented at all.
And it's nice that you break it down like that, as if we had coordinated, Mario, but of course we haven't. Rather, I believe that this exact balance, as a leader, you stand in the middle, you have to address the needs of the people, which you also have. You also need security as a leader. You also want to belong. You need a certain status, but you also need autonomy, meaning a framework in which you can operate, in which you can make decisions. You want to be treated fairly. So that's one side. That's what you want as a leader, but your employees want that too. And on the other side, you have a task to ensure revenue, results, success, market share, growth, and so on. And this juggling is not easy and requires effort. And we are talking here about human-centered leadership. So on one hand, it's about focusing on the people, but also on myself as a leader. And on the other hand, not forgetting that an organization as a system is designed to and must achieve results, generate revenue, and be successful. So, and this juggling, and you asked earlier now about technology, in my view, is significantly accelerated or intensified by the impact of technology, because I already mentioned AI earlier. The speed and innovation we are experiencing there in a much shorter time naturally impactful, meaning employees and leaders, as well as corporate management, and finding a solid answer to how things will proceed in the future, which relevant decisions will be made, which relevant decisions are necessary, and what role technology and employees will play is, of course, one of the crucial questions that need to be answered.
André, you were with Microsoft for a long time, and I absolutely like one of their claims, do more with less. This naturally also relates to topics like how do I lead an organization? How can I also find the right setup? But how can I also, of course, use technologies like AI, and not just AI, but also things like team? How can I utilize them? How do you perceive that? There has been a huge transformation, of course, among many of our clients, but also within our own organization during the Corona period. I find that totally exciting. So one thing is, of course, that in the past, I would actually fly to Switzerland for an hour-long meeting. Nobody does that anymore today. At least I don't. Unless it's a very important meeting for a supervisory board or management board or something similar, then maybe, but for a regular meeting, that doesn't really happen anymore. which is good for the environment on one hand, but on the other hand, it also naturally improves the efficiency of my daily routine. So now this naturally has a massive impact on organizations, like organizational formats and how living together is practiced. And you talk about a human-centric organization. If I take all of this experience from Corona and weigh it, how should I incorporate it to such a human-centric organization? How should I address that as well? How can I achieve a sense of togetherness, even though everyone is scattered all over the world and almost always only communicating virtually, like we are right now? It's really difficult to maintain humanity and interpersonal connections. What would be your advice?
Oh, that's certainly, Mario, a large and complex topic to start with. I'll try to break it down a bit and would first, since we're talking about leadership today, bring in the leadership perspective. Especially during Corona, as you mentioned, leading from a distance where we had no or very few personal contacts, has shown us all that we humans are inherently social beings. We cannot do without these human relationships. And by the way, it's a good thing that it's like that. Imagine if we were like machines, living unemotionally, so side by side and just working through tasks. That wouldn't work either. This means we need social contacts, social connection. I believe that Corona has shown one thing, that you can do leadership, remotely, virtually, if you do two things. That means if you use your human skills, being empathetic, showing emotions, engaging with people, if you live that, if you set an example, and if you allow it, that means it works on one side. On the other hand, it has also shown, because many, of course, know, and here you brought up the topic, well, how is it now with working from home versus being in the office? Many managers, there were many discussions at the time, then fell into micromanagement. Yes, the trust in or the trust towards the employees was lacking to say, oh yes, I trust them to do their job, versus, well, they just sit in front of Instagram and YouTube from morning till night, just decorating their office and not working anymore. And to have the different leadership styles and skills as a leader in a toolbox, and to pay attention to when I need to lead in which way. When can I really delegate? When can I coach? When do I need to lead directly? Which, by the way, I know is not bad at all from a leadership perspective, Jan, but always centered on the person and always as necessary for the situation.
Yes, I think that's good.
Let's leave it at that. Yes. What are your experiences with that? I mean, we've all gone through Corona. How did you experience it?
Oh, I experienced it like a journey, to be honest. At the beginning, we all shook ourselves, right? It was, not really comfortable at first, right? Even though we were already using Teams in our organizations, being completely reliant on Teams and sitting at home was quite challenging. What I personally noticed is that it always strongly depends on the individual situation. Yes, actually younger people who might have moved away from their families and are living alone in a small apartment. Yes, you have to clearly say that they became somewhat isolated during that time. I believe it was a very tough time for many younger people. And of course, also for others. It's not just about age. I think especially singles who might not have a large circle of friends. We have many colleagues who work in IT who might not be very extroverted. For them, I believe it wasn't that easy. And you can definitely notice that also in the way people live together. I would even go so far as to say that you could really feel the tension sometimes. So I had the feeling that many people, maybe even myself, you don't really notice it yourself, were a bit more irritable. I found that there was always this underlying tension. I don't know how you perceived it.
Absolutely, Mario. There was this underlying tension and also a strain because it was, of course, unusual for all of us to be sitting alone in the home office, only seeing colleagues virtually over Teams. I would say you also mentioned the positive effects. You no longer fly from Munich to Hamburg or wherever for a 1-hour meeting unless it's absolutely necessary. But there are also negative effects, which we noticed as well, namely this underlying tension, the nervousness, because we missed the human relationships, the contacts. So you have a family, I have a family. That means we still had social contacts. Yes, but at the end of the day, many, and you mentioned it, those who were alone, who were in their apartments, they missed the social contacts. And that's really an issue.
I want to share something funny with you. Here, right? I'll tell you a story. This is my personal Corona story. We had a very renowned client, a pitch, yes. And at the beginning of Corona, many were in the home office and didn't turn on their cameras. Now imagine, I did a sales pitch with my team, and on the other side, we had 10 people, and none of them had their cameras on. That means you spoke into a black hole for about 1.5 to 2 hours, and no one said anything, no one asked any significant questions, and then we lost the pitch. What do you think the feedback we received was? The feedback was that they would have liked more interaction, and that's my personal Corona story. Things loosened up a bit later on, but I found that quite amusing. I really had to laugh about it, and then I said, come on, they just weren't our client. Sometimes that's just how it is. But I also believe, personally, I feel that Corona has brought a lot of positive things, yes, in that regard, as you say, especially for Consulto. The travel time has become minimal, compared to before. I've had days where I was in 6 different cities in one day. A total environmental disaster, but also in terms of time rhythm, that has improved a lot. So if I look at myself personally, I've gained a lot of quality of life by traveling less.
I feel the same way.
As you say, André, leadership is possible now, even virtual. But I think you always have to, I'm a fan of the hybrid approach, Mamanti. You still have to meet in person regularly. And then it's not a problem, just like with us. We meet in person occasionally and sometimes virtually. And then it works, right? It's like how it used to be with phone calls, only now with video.
That's true. Speaking of phone calls, yes, it's kind of like that, but it started even before COVID, that people would rather write 1,000 emails instead of picking up the phone and resolving things quickly in 5 minutes. I would say what I would be interested in, Mario, we're talking about human-centered leadership. We've talked about COVID, and you probably also know this tendency to say, oh man, now we have a problem here and we can't solve it. Then we have to organize a meeting. And then there are 20 people sitting there and maybe 2 or 3 of them are talking. How do you deal with such situations?
Yes, that's a good point. I think we all face that challenge. There are also organizations, I've thought about this before, that consciously say, no meetings with more than 3 to 4 people. Bossy, yes. I find that an interesting approach. We don't always manage it either. The meeting culture is indeed such that meetings are also getting larger. For example, what I've said now is that I would like us to pay more attention to having meetings at off-peak times, so preferably early in the morning or later in the evening, because during the day, of course, you want to be available for the customers. We don't always succeed in that either, So one has to be fair and acknowledge that. But I do believe, at least I do in creating awareness for it and really saying we need to have fewer meetings. What really concerns me, for example, is the topic. I don't know what your experiences are, but my experience, I also noticed that many, not just in our company, but in general, I hear this everywhere. The issue of making a decision and potentially making a mistake and also taking responsibility for it is something that more and more people are struggling with, especially after Corona. And the second thing, which you also often hear from customers, is that fewer and fewer people really want to become leaders. Yes. So digital leadership, is one thing, but becoming a leader in the traditional line organization, not many want that anymore. How do you see that? Or what feedback do you get on that?
Yes, that's a very crucial question. Because I just had this in a customer workshop 2 weeks ago, where there was increased criticism of the board team due to an employee survey. And a few points emerged that crystallized a bit. And one topic was making decisions and then consistently following through. And the other topic was responsibility. Notice in many companies is that there is this kind of monkey management. Oh, can't make the decision. So dear boss, why don't you make it? And then the monkey sits on your shoulder, Mario, or on mine, Mario, that we have to make this decision. And my thesis on this, Mario, is that this always happens when I either have no trust in the team, so no trust basis, no commitment in this team, and above all, no conflict culture in the team. Because I often observe that I can't have a factual, professional argument with a team without it becoming personal, but that it is always taken personally immediately. And that is a crucial ability of leaders, human-centered leadership, to create this ability in a team and, of course, to set an example themselves.
Yes, I agree with you. It's always difficult, of course, I mean, leaders usually have a big ego. When you receive feedback that you don't like, it naturally scratches at your ego. And in that sense, it's really the biggest challenge, I think, for all of us. But I think it's still something that can be mastered. Yes. And I believe, André, with that, we've really outlined the topic of human-centered leadership quite well in the first podcast episode, also touching on various facets. We'll naturally continue through other podcast episodes. This should serve as a starting point. And by the way, yes, here this is André's book, Digital Leadership Culture. You absolutely must get it. You'll also find a link here where you can buy it. Yes. And I think you can explore the topic with really great insights there, André. I really enjoyed reading your book, which was published by Haufe. I think the topic and can be explored even more deeply there.
Thanks for the commercial break, Mario. And let's remember, leadership remains human, yeah? And that's a good thing. And we would be absolutely delighted if you comment on this podcast again very diligently. Give us your feedback, subscribe to it on social media, and feel free to give us tips or suggestions on what topics we should cover in the upcoming episodes. We look forward to it.